we're going to finish this morning's session on a really exciting note with a look at the G20 in focus. And I'd like to invite my colleague Divya Sharma, the Executive Director for India at Climate Group, to the stage as we do a deep dive into India's G20 presidency in focus. Divya.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be a part of the Asia Action Summit organized by the Climate Group. After witnessing 14 successful years of the Climate Week in New York, I'm tremendously encouraged to witness the launch of the Asia Action Summit in Singapore. Asia, with its vast potential, is poised to become a hot...
Thank you, Sam. Sorry for that. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final panel of the Green Energy Forum, India's G20 Presidency in Focus. My name is Divya Sharma. In this session, we'll be looking at what India's G20 presidency means for energy transition across the region. And we'll be digging down into major energy-related policies being pursued, hearing from those that are shape the agenda and looking ahead to what we can expect from the G20 in September. First, we have a virtual address from Mr. Amitabh Kant. He's India's G20 Sherpa, Government of India.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be a part of the Asia Action Summit organized by the Climate Group. After witnessing 14 successful years of the Climate Week in New York, I'm tremendously encouraged to witness the launch of the Asia Action Summit in Singapore. Asia, with its vast potential, is poised to become a hotbed for groundbreaking climate solutions and innovations. India's G20 presidency offers a unique opportunity to showcase its commitment to environmentally conscious and equitable economic development on the global stage. Despite the challenges we face in our post-COVID world, such as rising debt distress, a polarized geopolitical environment, recession and climate change impacts, we can find opportunities within these challenges. Under the leadership of our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, India has tirelessly worked towards making India's G20 presidency inclusive, ambitious, action-oriented, and decisive. Despite being a fast-growing nation with a high energy demand, India has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to mitigating climate change. In fact, India is the only G20 country in the top 10 rankings of the Climate Change Performance Index. India achieved its first NDC 9 years ahead of schedule. 40% of electric installed capacity came from renewable sources in 2021 against a target of 2030. Today, the cost of renewable energy in India is highly competitive globally, with private capital leading the way and the government supporting the transition. India also led the formation of the International Solar Alliance. India aims to become a global green hydrogen hub, decarbonize key sectors, and produce 10 MMTPA of green hydrogen by 2030 at some of the lowest costs in the world, positioning itself as the least cost producer and becoming a global export hub. Further, the Indian Railways is set to go net zero by 2030, and the adoption of electric vehicles and biofuels is increasing rapidly. Policy actions have also accelerated energy storage deployment. Setting the targets for climate action, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has provided 5 critical elements of Panch Amrit that resonate with the Global South at COP26. These elements are reflected in our updated NDCs that by 2030 we would. Firstly, reduce emissions intensity of our GDP by 45% from 2005 levels. Achieve 50% cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel-based energy resources and create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent through additional forest and tree cover. Recognizing that the fight against climate change is a collective one rooted in individual action, the Prime Minister launched a Lifestyle for Environment Life. This framework integrates the development and climate agenda through multi-stakeholder collaboration with a focus on individual actions and behavior. India has also submitted its long-term low-carbon development strategy to reach net zero emissions by 2070 to the UNFCCC. While industrialized nations in the global north experienced high emissions intensity during their industrialization, India's approach focuses on industrializing with decarbonisation strategies. This model sets an example that economies in the global south can celebrate and emulate. While doing so, India adheres to the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, recognizing varying responsibilities among nations. Support for developing countries' energy transitions is crucial for poverty reduction and sustainable development. Developing nations face the challenge of decarbonizing electricity generation, industrial operations, and transport. During our G20 presidency, we will embed sustainability, climate change, and green development across working groups. We will promote sustainable production and consumption through lifestyle for environment and circular economy initiatives. India is building consensus on standards for green hydrogen, biofuels, and bioenergy, focusing on decarbonizing industrial sectors and long-distance transport. Ecosystems restoration and sustainable climate-resilient blue economy are also priorities. Another innovation during India's presidency is the creation of the Disaster Risk Resilience Working Group under the Sherpa track. It focuses on issues like early warning system, disaster response mechanism, and infrastructure risk assessment tools. Developed countries must acknowledge their responsibility for historic carbon emissions and incentivize emerging economies for a green transition. We must recognize that the nations most vulnerable to climate change are not the cause of it. The persistent financing gap is the binding constraint in achieving our collective SDG and climate goals. Climate finance targets agreed to in Copenhagen in 2009 continue to fall short. Multilateral development banks play a crucial role in global economic development since World War II. However, the world has witnessed incredible technological and financial innovation since then. The sheer size of investments required by developing nations means that multilateral banks must enable the mobilization of private capital and savings. Reformed MDBs are therefore crucial to our goals. As a leading voice from the global south, India can shape history by collaborating with G20 nations to lay the foundation for a just green transition. A supportive policy mix, including ensuring a level playing field for renewable energy companies, strengthening market structures, promoting investments, working with utilities, removing regulatory barriers, and supporting a credible and transparent system, will greatly strengthen green energy markets within G20 nations. Organizations like the Climate Group have played a pivotal role in driving renewable energy adoption through initiatives like RE100, EP100, EV100, Steel Zero, and Concrete Zero. These have sent the right demand signals to the market and created positive externalities. Ladies and gentlemen, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade requires rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes across society. Prioritizing green energy is crucial to achieving a sustainable and equitable society. Failure to adopt renewable energy and continued reliance on polluting sources will have severe consequences. The time to act is now, and with faster adoption of renewable energy and a proactive government mindset, the dream of a just energy transition can become a reality. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a real pleasure interacting with all of you.
So that was the voice of India to all of the world from the G20 presidency this year. Keeping the inspirational flavor in the room, I would like to invite our panelists to join me on stage. I would like to invite Ms. Roshni Sen, Principal Secretary, Environment, Government of West Bengal, to the dais please from there. Ms. Namita Vikas, Founder and Managing Director, Octus ESG LLP. Please have a seat. Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO of Council on Energy, Environment and Water, India. Welcome to all the panelists. Thank you for being with us today. I would just like to jump into the panel discussion without wasting any time, and I would like to start with Arunabha, if that is all right with you. So, you've been at the helm of things around G20 presidency from the beginning itself and even before that. What does India's G20 presidency mean for energy transition in the region, and what major energy related policy changes are being pursued by the presidency?
Sure. First of all, many thanks, Divya, and to the Climate Group for having me here, and it's a great honor to be on this panel. As you just heard from Mr. Kant, the Sherpa, there is an expansive agenda which is meant to be just, inclusive, and action-oriented. I represent an independent institution called the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We're among the 20 best climate think tanks in the world. But within the context of the G20, I serve as an advisor to the finance track, to the finance minister, as well as to the Sherpa and the Sherpa track. And CW is a strategic or a knowledge partner to 11 ministries of the Government of India for its G20 presidency. Now, to your question, Divya, when you say what is critical for the energy transition, it's important to first understand, before we talk about the energy transition working group of the G20, it's important to understand how India has embedded the energy transition and climate action across the entire G20 agenda. So broadly, there are these two tracks, finance and the Sherpa track. And within each track, there are multiple working groups. Just as an example, in the finance track, there's something called the Sustainable Finance Working Group, which of course has to now think about the innovative financing mechanisms that can blend capital, take forward the agenda from the Indonesian presidency, but also mobilize capital not just for climate action alone, but the SDGs overall. We can recognize that we are hosting the G20 presidency right in the middle of the 2015 to 2030 SDG agenda. Equally, there is another working group called the Framework Working Group, which deals with the broader macroeconomic situation in the world, particularly the rising indebtedness for many emerging markets and developing countries. Now, how do you accelerate climate action when your fiscal space is constantly getting constrained? So unless we figure out a way, a sustainable way to manage debt for the vast majority of the world's countries, you will not get the finance to invest in sustainability. Switching very quickly to the energy, to the Sherpa track, again, there's the Environment, Climate, Sustainability Working Group, which is trying to push for circular economy, resource efficiency, the blue economy, again, taking forward the Oceans 20 dialogue that kicked off with the Indonesian presidency, taking it forward under the Indian presidency as well. And then there is also this new working group that India has initiated called the Disaster Risk Reduction Working Group, which Mr. Kant also just referred to. So when you see this entire backdrop, then the priorities under the Energy Transition Working Group begin to make even more sense, because it is part of a larger package of sustainability initiatives. Now, within the Energy Transition Working Group, number one priority is actually energy security, but not just with the fuels of the past, but with the fuels of the future as well. So what are those supply chains, the new resilient, reliable supply chains that will deliver the clean energy products that are needed across the emerging markets, particularly in Asia, where energy demand will grow the fastest? Similarly, there is the question around, the low-cost financing of this energy transition. And this is why the reform agenda under the multilateral development banks, as well as the innovative financing solutions that come up within the energy vertical, becomes important. A third dimension is going to be the energy efficiency story, particularly in trying to double the rate of energy efficiency by 2030, while identifying the opportunities for the harder to abate sectors, the heavy industries. And this is finally where the technology cooperation, including cooperation on sharing and co-developing technologies, new paradigm of shifting away from tech transfer to tech co-development, particularly around things like green hydrogen, around next generation biofuels. India is looking to promote a biofuels alliance, looking to set the standards and certification protocols for green hydrogen so that we create more fair, more competitive, more transparent, and yet more at scale markets for these energy technologies. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you, Aruna. That was very comprehensive. Thank you very much for bringing that in. I want to go next to Namita. We've been speaking about climate financing. What can the G20 do to accelerate finance towards climate transition in countries like India particularly, and help overcome the challenges that we are facing in the transition story?
Thank you for that question. Well, you know, we as Octus ESG, we work with a lot of financial institutions. So we are a global strategic advisory firm where we work on sustainable finance, climate transition mainly. And what we hear from the private sector is that there is a lot of inertia in coming forward because of obvious reasons. And what, you know, we also heard Mr. Khan saying that the DFI funding, the multilateral funding in this space is higher, but at the same time, they cannot really meet the needs of the huge volume of capital that is required towards the overall transition or for climate particularly. And I think somewhere, you know, bringing in that private capital would need a couple of things. And we've seen a lot of DFIs come out with blending schemes, right? So there are blending schemes which provide some kind of concessionality, they provide risk guarantees towards climate finance. I think what we need as far as G20 is concerned is we need G20 country national developmental institutions to come forward and to work with the private sector and, you know, facilitate such blending schemes which go beyond just concessionality or risk cover. I think they need to look at, you know, specific hedging products for, say, currency risks to bring in the cross mobility of finance. So that's, I think, an important point. Then, you know, political risks insurance in certain countries, so that was also very, very important. Technical assistance and grants, especially for carbon reduction technology financing. I think that is very much required. And, you know, we were hearing the earlier panel talk about green bonds. Yes, green bonds have become mainstream. But I think, you know, what's important is to expand this whole green finance, climate finance space and take advantage of products like SLLs, sustainability linked loans or sustainability linked bonds, which have been quite popular. And if, you know, the development financial institutions play a role there in providing some kind of cover, then we have more private capital coming in. I think one other point I want to make is, you know, we have very good, solid local, national financing bodies, which are like the national development banks, right? But they get rarely mentioned when we talk about the global or domestic finance. I think building their skills, building their knowledge and facilitating them, or say a large G20 country DFI comes in as an anchor investor to provide them that momentum, I think that is very important. Mr. Kant mentioned about MDB reforms. I think that's very important to make them efficient and effective, but that would require effort, innovation, understanding of what is at stake, what are the solutions, and also negotiation, right? So that really needs to be prioritized by G20, and I'm hoping that India will push that mandate at least during this time. So that would be useful. And the last one is on taxonomies. A classification is very, very important, and there are countries like India who are yet to arrive at that classification, right? I mean, we do have our green deposit framework that's come up, the Indian sovereign bond that came up have some criteria in terms of which sectors. So there's a broad guideline, but there needs to be a common Asian, maybe a taxonomy with local alignment. I think that's important, because if you look at the EU taxonomy, if you look at what the Americans are talking about, or if you look at what other countries, they may not be relevant for a market like India or relevant for a market like Indonesia. So I think we need to look at that larger taxonomy, the larger classification, and I think G20 plays a very important role in that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I'm glad that you brought that out because I'm on the task force on the Urban 20 initiative engagement, and this task force is looking at climate financing for cities, and one of the major expertise that is coming out of it is around taxonomies. How do you define where is this finance needed? Of course, the Think 20 engagement group is also looking at, as you were saying, MDB reforms very closely during our presidency this year. I'll come to you, Roshni ji. You are a very senior IAS officer working very closely with government. How do you think our states are aligning their climate action and policies with the net zero commitment of Government of India?
Okay, thank you, Divya. Esteemed panelists, learned audience, the climate group, thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here in this Asia Action Summit and also giving me the opportunity to speak on the occasion. Yes, right, all the states, we have another state with us, the state of Chhattisgarh, and of course West Bengal from where I hail. We are actually aligning our climate actions. India made this commitment of net zero in 2021, I think, in the COP26 in Glasgow. And for that, India is taking action at all levels, at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, because climate change is an area where action has to be taken at all levels. In fact, till the last person, we have to take meaningful actions. Amongst others, our department or our state government is upgrading the State Action Plan on Climate Change, SAPCC as it is called, to align with this commitment through multi-stakeholder consultation, and my department in fact is coordinating this consultant. Now, what are the main issues that this SAPCC aims to address? There are several issues, I will just point out a few. Our state is a very unique state. It has the Himalayas in the north, the Indo-Gangetic floodplains with a multitude of water bodies in the middle, and the Sundarbans with its famous mangroves in the south. And our SAPCC aims to set out these unique vulnerabilities of the state. We are trying to build synergy between different sectors with a sustainability agenda, the green, resilient and inclusive development, GRID in short. At the same time, we are trying to synergize with the goals of the nationally determined contributions, the NDC, which Mr. Kant also spoke about under the Paris Agreement. Our SAPCC is also aligned with the National Forest Policy, biodiversity goals, e-mobility program, Swachh Bharat mission, etc. Our action plan is aligned with the national missions under the National Action Plan on Climate Change, including sustainable habitat, sustaining Himalayan ecosystem, enhanced energy efficiency, water, solar, green India and sustainable agriculture. Now, since I am a practitioner, I will like to mention some of the specific initiatives that our state has taken. Sundarbans is a huge bioshield which is protecting us from a lot of pollution coming from the south. What we are aiming is to develop a man-made bioshield along the border district of the state of Jharkhand. This is actually a thick vegetation strip comprising of 3 levels of tall trees, subtree and shrubs, which will act as a windbreaker and also accumulator of air pollutions. The selected plants will be indigenous and soil climate specific. This will not only control transboundary pollution, but also help in carbon sequestration, water retention and community and sustainable livelihoods. We have 10 biodiversity heritage sites for protection of the rich biodiversity of the state. Multiple initiatives for setting of Miyawaki forest, especially in urban areas, they have been taken. We are ensuring that green firecrackers are used in certain festivals like Diwali, where firecrackers are used. We have replaced the normal firecracker with green firecracker, and we are stringently enforcing that. Polluted river stretches are being sustainably cleared. 4 such stretches have already been delisted from the polluted category, and more will soon be delisted. My speakers before that have spoken about solar power. Several solar projects have been set up in our state. In fact, our state is one of the pioneers in having grid connected solar power plants, and now we are also setting up floating solar power plants which are more energy efficient, like there is a 500 megawatt floating solar power project coming up in Bakreshwar. Water detention structures, and this is very interesting, have been created in the Sundarbans by re-excavation of old silted creek. This is a World Bank funded project. To reduce pollution from biomass burning, and it's not just stubble burning, it's also biomass burning in the households for burning of wastes, etc. We are taking stringent steps through satellite monitoring, and we are also distributing gas ovens, smokeless ovens, introducing less polluting fuels for transport like CBM, CNG, biogas. Biogas was also spoken about, so we are encouraging setting up of biogas, especially from cow dung in various parts of the state. The Garden Rich Shipbuilders and Engineers Limited, in consultation with our state government, is designing and constructing the next generation electric ferry or green ferry that will reduce carbon emissions in the water transport sector. Not only that, it will also reduce all spillage in the seas and the oceans. Our construction and demolition waste recovery center of 500 tons per day capacity has been set up near Kolkata, our capital of West Bengal, for recycling the construction demolition wastes and for using the making bricks for paving activities. Bioremediation activities have been carried out in the legacy waste dump sites. Already I am happy to say 32 such dump sites have been cleared. As much as 120 acres of land has been freed up, and more are on the anvil. So the reclaimed land is being used for processing of fresh waste. So open dump sites, for which we are notorious, will soon be a thing of the past. As you know, a key area in climate activities is community participation. We have ensured that the self-help groups in our state are involved in the waste management activities. We are also aligning with NGOs, international institutions and others, so as to keep our commitment for the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for introducing all of us with all the steps and activities that Government of West Bengal is taking towards that. I would come to Arunabha now. You've spoken about a lot of Sherpa treks and other working groups that have been constituted. You yourself are part of some of them. What outcomes do you expect from G20 that would help lead to COP this year and maybe to the next G20 presidency in Brazil?
I think, first of all, we've got to recognize that why 2023 is super important and not just for the Indian G20 presidency. The discussions that began in April at the World Bank spring meetings is just one part of that broader multilateral development bank reform agenda. India has created a special task force committee chaired by Mr. N.K. Singh from India, former Member of Parliament and Chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, along with Larry Summers, former US Treasury Secretary. So they are driving this agenda on the reform of the multilateral development banks. And as you know, we now have a new president of the World Bank. So that reform agenda is going to be absolutely critical in leading up to the kind of international financial architecture that will be necessary to drive some of the solutions that Namita was referring to. Equally, later this month, President Macron is going to host a summit on financing on the 22nd, 23rd of June. And India and France are co-chairing the steering committee for that. And a lot of that is oriented around how do you mobilize capital for the vulnerable, drive private investment in low-income economies, drive infrastructure investment in emerging markets, and figure out new innovative ways to tap into global trade and investment flows to mobilize the actual capital that can feed into those asset classes. So this will again be something that will then move further into the G20 presidency in terms of what the Sustainable Finance Working Group and other related working groups can deliver. And then I would say at least a couple more things will be important outcomes. One, as I mentioned, like a biofuels alliance, especially given that Brazil takes over the G20 presidency from us, and it has a big interest in biofuels as well. So I think that can be a baton that India then passes on. The rules around green hydrogen will be absolutely critical so that we don't create islands of regulation across the global economy. And the final thing is going to be this focus on sustainable consumption. India launched something called Mission Life last year, the Prime Minister and the UN Secretary General in October last year. It's about really driving sustainable consumption as just like energy efficiency is the first fuel. Sustainable consumption is the most important way in which you can reduce your footprint. But it's not just like feel good turning off lights and fans. It's actually understanding how does the GDP equation begin to look when you have sustainable consumption, sustainable investments, sustainable government expenditure, and sustainable net exports. When you actually translate that nudging of behavior with the enabling of markets for circular economy, you actually end up creating new markets worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So all of that will come together in the form of, maybe a green development pact of kinds or something like that. So the idea is, again, how do you take sustainability writ large and feed it through these different tracks so that you get these final outcomes that are more tangible, measurable, monitorable, but then can also be passed on for the subsequent 2 more emerging markets that will hold the G20 presidency, Brazil and then South Africa. So Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, this quad of emerging markets driving the G20 agenda means that you'll have a very different looking G20 by the time we get to 2025, 26.
Thank you for that, and thank you for bringing out Mission Life and its purpose. I think we are talking about our collective responsibility as we move ahead towards energy transition and a world that is changing very quickly, because behavior change and collective responsibility, I think, is at the crux of everything that we need to do. And that brings me to my another next question to you, Namita. And it's a classic question and a debate around profitability and sustainability versus sustainability. So do you think it is possible to maintain profitability while also reducing carbon footprint at the same time, with the financing standpoint, if I may ask you that?
Thanks, Divya. I think the short answer is yes, but there are a lot of nuances to it. I think, minimizing carbon and maximizing profits have always been a tough call for corporations, right? And the whole race to net zero has added that additional pressure onto industry, the financial institutions, governments to evolve with a cleaner world, if I may put it that way. On the other side, I think the reality is that there is a lot of shareholder, investor pressure and regulatory, because of certain regulations coming out, that has been demanding and increasing accountability on these aspects by corporations, right? Just to cite an example, I was reading an interesting article just this morning. So Standard Chartered Bank has already started to look at its financed emissions, and it has calculated that the climate risk to the hard to abate sector financing that it has right now is going to come up in 2030-35. However, the financing that they will do from now onwards will be very much under the glare of how carbon emissions are being mitigated or managed, right? I think on the other side, businesses are grappling with even the clarity on how do you transit, right? I mean, the larger corporations may have the support of big advisory or consulting firms to tell them that, but mid and smaller segments, I think they're all grappling with this. And what is the impact on profitability? I think there is no clear formulas to be able to arrive at that, and there are no capabilities. So the fundamental question of what you asked remains, right? I think to answer the question, many companies are reducing their capital expenditures associated with carbon producing activities or investing in renewable energy. I think we heard one of the earlier speakers say that 75% of their operations are net zero, right? However, all these efforts are more motivated on account of some environmental management systems that may have been put in, or because of regulatory pressures, right? So, but there is largely a disconnect with the business objectives, the core business objectives. So I think, you know, a clear view of how an organization needs to approach as far as its carbon engagement, if I may put it in that sense, is concerned, has to be done at the top. Because that's where the strategies are formulated, and you know, a clear view on how that's going to impact the margins across segments to the end-to-end value chain that one is looking at. And that would bring in a kind of transparency and enable decision making of companies to look at really what is material, and then therefore how much of how much of capital to be put in. I think one other point is, what has been successful is very targeted capital that has been put aside for certain targeted initiatives within a company. So, you know, say retrofitting. So, and a company decides that we want to retrofit all of its, electricity points, and then therefore a targeted investment would be able to deliver on the carbon reduction. I think one last point I want to make is, carbon emission reduction cannot have short-term gains. That, businesses really are, attuned to look at short-term gains, right? Even investments in these kind of activities would deliver long-term gains. So how do you manage that will be very, very important, and that patience to be able to wait until a particular initiative translates into carbon reduction. I think that is very, very critical. Thank you.
That was very useful, Namita. Thank you for that. And I will ask all three of you to give some closing remark later on around what would be that winning proposition that you think would G20 presidency of India will bring forth. But before that, I'll go to Roshni ma'am with my question on climate funds. So Roshni ji, climate funds have been a challenge in the past, and you work at the state level, you are representing West Bengal. How, in your opinion, are states channelizing multilateral development banks and other sources of funding to meet their climate mitigation and adaptation measures?
Yes, exactly. Our state, the country in general and our state in particular, we have implemented several projects with the assistance of World Bank and other multilateral development banks to mitigate the challenges of climate change. I have mentioned the project about the re-excavation of old silted creeks created in colonial times. The length may vary from 2 to 5 kilometers in the Sundarbans area, and they look like canals, but they had got absolutely filled up. Now that they are re-excavated, they can store fresh water. 500 kilometers of 600, I think, of such canals have been already excavated. And they are actually bringing in massive changes in the Sundarbans. They are reducing the salinity of the Sundarban areas, they are helping in agriculture, they are helping in pisciculture, they are sustaining livelihoods, and this project, as I said, was funded by World Bank. In the city of Kolkata, we had a huge dump site, it is called Dhapa. It is so big, it is almost like a small hillock. Now, with the technical and financial help of World Bank, we implemented closure and containment of the Dhapa municipal solid waste area, about 12.14 acres. A leachate treatment plant was also set up, and the whole area has become green now. With the help of Asian Development Bank, we implemented an environmental compliance assistance center to help industries and guide industries for various compliances. The World Bank assisted integrated coastal management project, enabled institutional strengthening and capacity building, and also executed beachfront development, stormwater drainage network, sanitary sewage schemes, cyclone shelter, livelihood development, ecotourism, etc. The Japan International Cooperation Agency is in the process of signing a loan agreement with the Government of India for forest and biodiversity conservation for climate change response in West Bengal. In December 2022, the countries of Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan and 4 Indian states in the Indo-Gangetic plain, namely West Bengal, Bihar, UP and also Punjab. We came together to design ways to combat air pollution through an airshed approach in the Indo-Gangetic Plain and Himalayan foothills. As you know that climate or air is not a localized issue. We have to think of it with a broader perspective. It's actually a regional issue. As I looked at today's news, you know, all of you must have seen that how forest fires in Canada is affecting New York. So it's definitely not or even in Singapore, you know, activities that are taken up in Malaysia affects the air in Singapore. So we have to think of it globally. We can't really act on air pollution in a localized manner. World Bank basically is guiding us in finding solutions for that matter. Locally, we will be carrying out a pilot project of distribution of low cost smokeless ovens and solar induction plates in 5 villages of 5 districts. And for this, we are taking help of IIT Delhi and TERI, who can actually do the calculation of the carbon saved and carbon sequestration, carbon credits earned. Our state is very actively monitoring the National Clean Air Program, NCAP, with the target of reducing PM10 levels to national standards in non-attainment cities. For that, we are working with urban local bodies in several areas like roadside plantations, maintenance of end-to-end road paving, solid waste management, establishment of Miyawaki forests. We are also implementing the National Mission for Clean Ganga for prevention, control and abatement of pollution of the river Ganga and other polluted river stretches with the help of the sewage treatment plants, the fecal sludge treatment plants, riverfront development, electric crematoria, and great improvements in the BOD levels of a river is seen. So in this connection, I would like to mention that we are an observer member of the Climate Group since 2016. The Climate Group has provided as a platform for knowledge sharing, global profiling, international networking, and best practices sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshni ji. Thank you very much for that and introducing us with a lot of work that the state government is doing. It's really inspiring. I think we are about time, but I would like to give you around 1 minute or a few seconds you would like to take to give us your closing remarks around maybe one winning proposition that you think should come out from G20 presidency in India this year. Maybe Arunabha.
Yeah, one in the same sequence. All right. If there's one winning proposition, I would call it a pact for green development, because I think what has happened for the longest time is we've thought about climate action as something separate from, you know, whatever development needs to happen, which is separate from where the finance will come from. What we haven't managed to do is come together with a package that delivers on all those fronts. And that will mean the de-risking and the blended finance to drive that investment, but it will also mean how do you mainstream climate action into the broader developmental paradigm. That means decarbonization without deindustrialization. That means not just the energy sector, but the broader approach towards urban development, agriculture, sustainable agriculture, etc. So just changing that paradigm would be very important. But there's one more thing. It's not about a G20 outcome. You know, the G20 outcomes can, eventually bore you to death. You'll just have to go through paragraphs and say, what was the outcome? But what is the message? I think the message is that emerging markets, we are having this conversation as part of Asia Action Summit, right? Can Asia save the climate? That's really the mega question, right? So the real message is that where the energy infrastructure is going to get built out, that's the scale where we should be concentrating our efforts. So whether it's India with the 4th largest renewable energy capacity or parts of this region in Southeast Asia, this is where the excitement and the scale will pan out. So this is where the solutions have to be developed. And a lot of the examples that you've just heard, also from West Bengal, you mentioned Chhattisgarh, Chhattisgarh solarized more than 1,000 primary health centers. So bringing the energy transition closer to people is another message that, again, fast-growing Asia can leave its not just their own citizens, but the rest of the world with.
I'll build on what Anurabha just said. You know, if we were to have a green development package, I think we also need a very, very focused methodology to involve the private sector in terms of financing. Because ultimately it is, I mean, we may say whatever as far as initiatives are concerned, the finance is really the one that will get things moving, right? So, you know, we've seen how the GCF has been quite successful. I mean, today it's been, it's done some 65, 70 project financing. They provide like a catalytic capital and then, you know, private sector comes in. I think the opportunity here is to put the semantics of, say, a climate bank together, which will deploy capital faster and not get stuck into any kind of procedural delays. And I think that kind of a institute to only provide risk cover. I don't think we have an institution standing alone to provide risk cover, and also a kind of technical assistance for skill enhancement. I think that's the big gap today within industry, within financial sector, even within governments. So I think we need a lot more of that. And I think my, my final point is that within the G20, of course, we have allied groups like the B20 or the T20. But within the G20, I think the involvement of private sector as a vertical, the way we have, disaster risk reduction introduced as a new vertical, I think a private sector vertical is much needed because they are not at the table and we are discussing them, right? Actions are by them. So how do you bring them? And I think Anurabha is very influential. Anurabha, you should take that up, but in this circuit. So I think there's merit for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita. Roshni ji, from your perspective, perhaps.
Yeah, I am, happy to say that I have been the nodal officer for West Bengal, so for G20 is concerned. And we already had 2 working group meetings, one in Kolkata, another in Darjeeling, and 1 engagement group meeting in Kolkata, and 1 more meeting is coming up. And I'll speak entirely from the practitioner point of view, because in all of the meetings we have ensured that the event, their health sustainability, no plastics, use of biodegradable materials, use of local products including the food, the menu, even the wine. After the event is over, proper waste management involving the local people, and you only talked about the private sector. We had a meeting in Darjeeling, there we involved the tea gardens. Tea garden is in the private sector, so we actually took the delegates to the field to have a field of tea plucking and tea manufacturing in a sustainable and clean manner. So G20 has been constantly focusing that the events take place in a clean, green way and spread the message of cleaner and greener practices.
Thank you so much. And that was a very, very effective panel. Thank you all for being with us today. And that is how I would like to close the panel. Thank you all for the great, fantastic audience that we had today. Hand over to Sam for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Divya, and thank you very much to a really interesting final panel of this morning. Now, I recognize the only thing standing between you and your dinner is me, so I shall keep my closing remarks brief. I'm not going to summarize this morning in detail, but what I do want to say is it's really clear from the conversations that this is where the action is. It's really clear to say that Asia is where the energy transition is particularly hot right now, and it's right to be focusing on getting it right in Asia. It's where a lot of the challenges are, but it's where also most of the solutions are. So it's very inspiring to hear governments, businesses, regulators, NGOs, etc., today all talking about solutions and all talking about the way ahead. Of course, challenges were mentioned, but over and over again we're hearing about solutions and the pace of change in renewable electricity, in hydrogen, in regulation, in energy efficiency, etc., and huge scales of projects at 920 megawatt wind farms that are as big as a modest-sized country. So I hope you found this morning interesting and also inspiring. I hope you're making some great connections today. I've already had people coming up to me asking what we're going to be covering next year. So we're really looking forward to repeating this conference next year, but we still have the afternoon to go. So without any more ado, please join us for lunch, which will be hosted in the space by the reception, and then onto the spotlight agenda from 2:15. That's 2:15 we'll be restarting, where you'll hear from a wide range of speakers from across the steel and energy sectors. So once again, thank you for your time, and thank you to our excellent presenters and panelists. We look forward to working with you in future to drive climate action fast. Thank you.